Hello, everyone, and welcome to a webinar on diversity and inclusion hosted by Schwegman, Lundberg, and Wosner and CHIPS. This is Suneel Arora from Schwegman and from the Schwegman firm, and I am very excited about the panel that we have assembled today, a very experienced panel that we have. It looks like there are still some people that are joining the webinar. Michelle, would you like us to wait just a minute or two before we get started?
Sure.
Okay. I think we'll just give it one or 2 minutes and then we'll get rolling. Okay, I guess we're short on time. We only have an hour for this webinar, so I will go ahead and get started. Again, thank you for joining our webinar on diversity and inclusion. We have initially titled this as Can the Pandemic Help Work Us Toward a More Inclusive New Normal? We have a great panel that we have assembled for you today. Before I introduce the panel, however, I want to turn it over to Teresa Stadheim, who is an attorney here at principal at the Schwegman firm. And she would like to say a few words about our co-sponsor, CHIPS. So Teresa.
Thank you, Suneel. So I just wanted to introduce our co-sponsor, CHIPS. CHIPS is an international organization dedicated to advancing and connecting women in technology, law, and policy. Right now, CHIPS has over 3,500 members, including a student chapter. And we have 16 chapters in the United States and around the world, mostly in Europe. I am co-chair of the Minneapolis chapter of CHIPS. We founded that chapter about 2 years ago, and we currently have about 100 members representing law firms, academia, corporations, and the judiciary. And since we started this chapter, we've had in-person and most recently virtual events, including a kickoff event at the Walker Arts Center and a charity event directed to collecting business clothing for women in need. We also recently held a virtual fireside chat with the Chief IP Counsel of 3M. And participation is open to anyone who shares our mission, men or women. And the link to join is on the screen, and I will also send a link by chat. You can also reach me at my email address, tstadheim@slwip.com. If you have any further questions on CHIPS, I'd be glad to talk to you about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa, for that introduction to our co-sponsor, CHIPS. With that, I would like to give a brief introduction to our panelists. I'm going to keep the introductions very brief. They have long and very illustrious CVs, but I will try to go through it rather quickly so that they can actually give a brief introduction to themselves. First, I would like to introduce Marla Butler. Marla is a litigation partner at Thompson Hine in Atlanta, where she has served on the executive board and diversity committee of the firm. She also serves on the board of the National LGBT Bar Association. Next, I'd like to introduce Nick Leach. Nick is just retired as managing counsel of technology and renewables at Chevron, and he has previous experience as a vice president and chief counsel at Kimberly-Clark. And he has extensive previous experience in patent practice and private practice. Next, I'd like to introduce Ron McCray, who is with Belo Corporation. He is currently also a private investor, corporate director, and a philanthropist with extensive C-level in-house and private practice experience. He has served and continues to serve on numerous governing boards. Next, I would like to introduce Macey Russell. Macey Russell is a partner in the complex trial and appeal group of Choate, Hall, and Stewart. He serves on several governance boards for nonprofits, academic, and medical institutions. He has researched and published extensively on diversity topics and is a member of the advisory board for the Institute for Inclusion of the Legal Profession. And Macey has been named the 2020 Diversity and Inclusion Lawyer of the Year for North America by Chambers. Next, I'd like to introduce my co-moderator, Piers Blewett. Piers is a principal at Schwegman, where he serves with me on the diversity steering group. His past experience includes in-house experience as general counsel at Kimberly-Clark and private practice experience, including in South Africa. And just to introduce myself briefly, I am a principal at Schwegman, where I serve on the executive board and diversity steering group. My focus is on patent law, and with particular emphasis in the medical device and semiconductor technologies. And what I'd like to do is I would like to ask all of the panelists to just briefly introduce themselves, and in so doing, share one of possibly three things: either a personal experience that helped shape their perspective on diversity, equity, inclusion, or another person who helped mentor or shape their career trajectory, or three, tell us something about what you wish you would have known when you entered the practice. And so since I'm going to be posing the questions, I will just start out with myself and basically say that, the perspective that I bring to this, or my life experiences, I grew up in Western Wisconsin as really the only non-white family in my hometown. And so I do know what it feels like to be an outsider, and I also know what it feels like to be welcomed into a very inclusive community. So that's the perspective that I come to. I have been involved with diversity issues within Schwegman for about the past 5 years. In terms of the second question, a person who's mentored or helped shape my career trajectory, for me, that would be Steve Lundberg, who's the managing principal at the Schwegman firm, who always gave me plenty of opportunities throughout my development of my practice here at the firm, and gave me quite considerable autonomy and considerable advice and mentoring. And I remember that and try to replicate that experience for all the others that are coming in behind me, the more junior attorneys. And then third, in terms of what I wish that I would have known when I entered the practice, I would just say that I think I didn't know how inclusive an environment could actually be created, and that firms actually have very different cultures and different environments. And I'm sure that's part of what we'll be talking to as we talk to some of the panelists who have been in a wide variety of different environments, and what worked and what didn't work. That's part of the theme of what we're going to talk about. And we're interested to hear as to their experience as to what worked, before the pandemic, and what we might learn going forward in kind of this new normal. And with that, maybe we can just start with you, Marla, if you want to just introduce yourself and give us, maybe touch on one or more of those the 3 points.
Sure. So thanks for inviting me to participate in this. First, one correction on my bio, Suneel. I think we merged my experience at 2 different firms. So while I certainly did serve on the executive board at my last firm, I've been at Thompson Hine for a little over a year, have not yet at least served on the executive committee of that firm. In terms of what I wish I knew when I started the practice of law. So I started practicing law in '97, and I probably started having discussions about diversity, real discussions in a formal way with leadership, et cetera, probably in 1999 or so. And I think I wish I knew then that I would be having these exact same discussions 20 plus years later, right? That we would be sitting around having discussions that we were having 20, 23 years ago. That's been frustrating for me in many respects. but you know, I have remained focused on diversity. I'm a woman, I'm African American, I'm a lesbian, and I practice IP law. So I feel like almost all circles that I move in, I'm a unicorn of sorts. And so focus on diversity has been in part a matter of survival. And it's also been a matter of, over the years, watching so many attorneys.
Marla, we may have run into bandwidth issues with you because you appear to be frozen.
Oh no. Ah. Can you hear me?
I can hear you
You're
now.
back now,
Yeah,
Marla.
it's actually back.
Okay. All right. And if that happens again, I'll stop my video and just go by audio. So the focus on diversity for me has been a matter of survival and also a matter of making sure that young people coming up in this profession have the best opportunity to succeed in it.
Great. Thanks, Marla. I really appreciate that. Nick, would you care to introduce yourself and say a few words?
Sure, Suneel. Thank you. And thanks again for the opportunity to participate in this discussion. I think it's a really important one to have. We learn by talking to each other. And so mine is, I'll try and make this quick, a personal experience. And I hope it's relevant to particularly younger lawyers as they are moving forward in their careers and determining what's next for them. I was a couple of years out of law school, and looking at the IP practice is one that I really wanted to get more deeply invested in and move to a firm that was 100% IP. So from the firm that I joined when I was out of law school, which was a GP firm with an IP group. And so, not surprisingly, I reached out to several recruiters, and one of them, and I'm not going to mention his name or his firm, and it'll become clear why not, hopefully as I go on, provided me what he thought was some helpful advice for me. His view was, if I was going to be successful in the IP space, I needed to go back to engineering school, get a different degree, and also I needed to edit my resume a bit, and to use his word, to make it more colorblind. So I had been active in some different organizations in law school, particularly the Black Law Students Association, and I thought that was a good thing. In his view, it was not. So needless to say, hopefully needless to say, didn't take his advice. I think I've had a modicum of success in the IP field. And I say that, I raise that story and that experience as one, just to let everyone who's in this space get comfortable with, you are in the best position to determine how high you're going to rise. And there will be hurdles. There will be people either misinformed or maybe even worse, who will steer you in the direction that they think is best for you. You need to decide that for yourself. You need to decide how high you can rise. And I've never met this man, but if I did, I actually would tell him thank you. Because 30 years on, I still remember I only talked to him twice, but I remember that conversation. And every time I move forward career-wise, I remember that conversation and thought, I'm going to show this guy that it's not what I look like. It's not my ethnicity. It's not anything other than what am I capable of that determines how high I'm going to go. So I offer that to inspire anyone and everyone who's invariably going to run into some hurdles along the way. They can be overcome if you're up to it.
Nick, thanks for that very pointed story, and I'm sure that the other panelists will have a lot to add on that subject as we get into the discussion. So we'll have to pick that one up as we get into the discussion. Thank you. Ron, would you like to take a couple minutes and give us a little bit of perspective on where you're coming to this discussion from?
Sure, Suneel. First of all, I want to thank Schwegman for hosting this program. I think it's an important subject, and it's been near and dear to my heart for my entire career. In terms of my career, I have worked at 2 law firms in private practice. I've worked in-house, including as general counsel. I've worked the C-suite as his number 2 guy at Nike as chief administrative officer. And I've worked as chairman, president, CEO of a publicly traded company. The import of all that speaks to something Nick said. In each venue in which I have had an opportunity to operate, I have tried to identify the most talented person in the firm, the company, that I could look to for support of my growth in that venue. And at each time, most times, I found a person or 3, and they helped the trajectory and the arc of my career. On those occasions, those few occasions where I could not find someone, I made as effectively as I could a beeline exit for the doors, because I thought without growth, I was wasting my time. In terms of people who have shaped my career, as I indicated, at each place in which I have worked, there's been at least one person who has taken me under his or her wings, if you will, to guide me through private practice, through the in-house ladder track, and even becoming a CEO. When I was about 30 years old, I had the wonderful fortune of working with a CEO of Kimberly-Clark. You'll hear Kimberly-Clark as a recurring theme here, I think. CEO of Kimberly-Clark, who, if you know the book Good to Great, was considered by Jim Collins, the author, to be one of the greatest CEOs in the 20th century. Well, it just so happened that this CEO, Darwin Smith, had been a lawyer who had practiced in private practice and had worked his way up the ranks at Kimberly-Clark to become CEO. Darwin Smith's model informed most everything that I do, and I was fortunate that he took me under his wings for the 5 years that he remained at the company while I was there, to help me chart a career that led me to do all the things that I do. So I'll end by saying that I see diversity as a subset of training. I wish I had known when I left law school that practice and law school are not the same thing. These mentors helped me understand how important what the texture of practice is as opposed to law school. But more significantly, in learning how to practice law, learning how to become an executive, learning how to lead a company, were all intentional acts of training. Intentional by me in seeking out mentors, and intentional by my mentors in helping me shore up my weaknesses, build on my strengths, so that I could be effective in the roles that I would take. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron. Some great points there, and I think mentorship is something that we hope to make the focus of the rest of the discussion too. So we'll be returning to that extensively. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Macey to give us an introduction. And Macey brings, as I mentioned, a lot of life experience and a lot of scholarship to this field as well. So Macey, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Great, thank you. And I must say that I'm shortlisted for the Minority Lawyer of the Year. I haven't won it yet. I'll find out if I make it in September. But I'm happy to be part of that list. I think my coming at this is, I'll give you just 2 quick examples. When I was in law school, I interviewed at a major Boston law firm. I guess we could call them a white shoe law firm. And in the course of the interview, the senior partner looked at me and said, "Wouldn't you be better off, working in Roxbury and helping your people why would you ever want to work in a law firm like this? And my response was like, well, people that went to law school are working in law firms like this, and I don't see myself any different than them. And he had that troubled look on his face. So fast forward, I ended up clerking, and then I went to work for a law firm. And as I was making a move to another law firm, I was in an interview, and the guy took his glasses off and looked at me and told me his credentials and how smart he was. And he looked at me and said, I'm going to pay it forward right now. And I'm like, okay. He goes on to tell me that he was a kid that used to wear Coke bottle glasses and used to get beat up every day. When he got on the bus to go to the Boston Latin School, that bus went through Roxbury. And kids would constantly pick on him. Until one day, two big black guys decided enough was enough. And they stopped the kids on the bus from bullying him. He said he carried that with him all the way through his life. And when I walked in the door as a former college football player, he looked at me and said, I'm going to pay it forward. And I'm like, why are you telling me this story? But it was important to him to let me know that he was going to be my mentor. And he basically said, I want you just to do what I'm asking you to do. Put in the time I'm asking you to put in. Don't question why I'm doing it. And if you do that, you'll be successful. So in some ways it was luck. But as I look back and what I wasn't realizing at the time that I now see is I was lucky that I had something that the old white partner wanted to connect with, and as a college athlete, we could talk about sports. And I didn't think much of it until I was a little bit older, but I realized that, like African-American women don't have that. There are a lot of people who don't have that advantage. And that was what allowed me to kind of break the ice and then get into the point where I could then work hard and try to prove myself. So I come at this from being a partner in Boston law firms for over 25 years. And during that time, not working with many people who look like me, it was like 12 years into my career before I was in a firm with another African-American person. So, I understand that what it's like to be isolated. I understand what it's like to be marginalized. I understand what it's like to be a fly on the wall in your own firm. And so, I'm committed to diversity and inclusion and to sharing the things that I've learned over the years, because I just know how difficult that journey is for any person of color. And we ought to be at a point in time where we shouldn't have to go through things like that, but we do. So hopefully we're at a point, as they say, 25 years later, where perhaps we have more people who've had those experiences of interacting with someone of color and having a positive experience and being willing to mentor somebody else. And I'll stop there.
So Marla, Ron, Nick, and Macey, thank you for those personal perspectives, and thank you for helping us out today. We're very appreciative of your time, and I'm actually heartened to see so many people on the call. I think most people from our firm and many of our clients are online, and all of us, Suneel and I and the team, we're also very mindful from our previous discussions with you that you're anxious, or you're not here to make happy talk, quote unquote, but to help us make real change. We gave some more thought to our broad goals, and we would like to become, or more well known as, what you might call a magnet firm or an attractive firm that offers opportunities, meaningful opportunities for the full development of diverse IP talent, particularly in patent and trademark prep and process, as we call it, which is our speciality. But it occurred to us that before rushing headlong into deeper action, sort of angrily spurred on by, for example, the deaths of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and others, I have been cautioned, in fact, by my kids, Dad, listen first. Don't assume you know. So with that in mind, Suneel and I will try and walk the panel through a few questions to help us all listen first. Thanks, Suneel.
Thank you, Piers. So the first question that I'd like to tee up for the panel, I'm going to ask a general question and then maybe a sub question. The first question is broad-based. What really needs to happen for law firms to become more diverse and inclusive places? And in answering that question, I'd like to ask the panelists just to tell us a little bit about the barriers that underrepresented attorneys face in law firms, and maybe their experiences in terms of what tools could be used to dismantle those barriers. And maybe we'll just run the questions through the list in the same order of the panelists. So Marla, if you're okay with starting out with that first question, that would be great.
Sure. So, as when 2008 happened, I think law firm life changed significantly with that recession. And one of the things that happened was a tremendous impetus on business development in law firms. The relationship partner was important. Service partners struggled a bit. And I think attorneys of color struggled in particular because developing business had been something that we had been struggling with, because the in-house lawyers that were handing out business, there aren't a lot of NICs out there. And so I think, one of the most important things that I think that can happen here is the partnership between in-house lawyers and law firm lawyers of color in handing work directly to lawyers of color. One of the things that I've seen over the years is corporations will have law firms complete these surveys of how the law firm is doing with respect to diversity, and sometimes make decisions based on how well or how poorly that law firm is doing. And I think to a large extent, that practice has been a disservice to law firm lawyers of color, because the law firm lawyers of color are forced to carry the weight of the firm's, kind of, for lack of a better way to put it, crappy diversity efforts. And I think, one thing that I would love to see in-house lawyers really consider doing is getting past the surveys and just handing work to attorneys of color. And then those attorneys of color can decide, this law firm is not a comfortable place for me. I'm going to take my practice and I'm going to go elsewhere. And then that's how the law firms will end up not doing well, if they're not doing well in their diversity efforts. That's one thought I have. Second thought, so the title of our presentation today is, Can the Pandemic Help Us Work Toward a More Inclusive New Normal, right? So we are on a webinar today. I know Schwegman normally does this conference in person. Everybody's in their own home or their own respective areas. And we will be doing this, I predict, for another year or so. So this time next year, we will be experts on remote working. That means that firms that are based, and I'll point to Schwegman because I know you guys are in Minneapolis, firms that are based in places like Minneapolis, the fact that there aren't a lot of Black professionals, for example, in Minneapolis, that will be more difficult to use for firms that are in these largely white cities. It'll be more difficult for firms to use that as an excuse for why you don't have more Black lawyers and lawyers of color, because we know we can work remotely. So that means that you can hire somebody in DC or Atlanta or in other parts of this country that are more diverse, and you can integrate them into your firm successfully because we're doing it right now. So that is something I hope we will learn from this pandemic, that we cannot tie ourselves to geography and use that as an excuse for the absence of diversity.
Thanks, Marla. I think that those are really great comments. Maybe we can turn it over to Nick. Nick, in terms of Marla's comment about, the variability in diversity efforts and whether it is really just burden shifting onto attorneys of color. Do you have any thoughts on, what separates a really truly legitimate diversity effort from, one that, really is a diversity effort that isn't really servicing, attorneys of color in terms of their career advancement? Nick, you're muted out, I think, still.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I do have some thoughts, and I don't want to steal ideas from my co-panelists because I know they have some very concrete and actionable items that are relevant to that point that they'll want to talk to. So I think for me, I'll just start with what's really the firm's attitude in this space, and what is the firm's goal, or what are the firm's goals. I think of diversity as diversity to me is about winning. And when I say that, I mean it's about finding the best talent you can and bringing them into your team, no matter where they're from, no matter what their ethnicity, sexual orientation, any of that. Best available talent. And if you build the best team, you have the best chance of winning, not only for you as your firm, but for your clients. And so I think if one of the core drivers is to be successful for your clients, then it all ties together, I think, very neatly, and it's easy to build the business case if that's really what you're about. And so I would say, look at what's core to your firm. And if that is core, then you go about building the structures that are necessary to make that actually happen. So you look at how are you putting together your, how have you structured your recruiting effort? What messaging are you giving to the recruiters that you reach out to and have relationships with? What's the makeup of the panels that interview candidates? What's the makeup of the slate of applicants that you're getting from the recruiters that you work with? And it goes on from there. Once they're in the firm, likewise, you have to build structure around advancement and equitable outcomes for the diverse slate of new attorneys that you bring into the firm, be they junior level, mid-level, or senior. So to me, it's really around fundamentally, what's the firm's goal? And then how do you devise and design the structure to make that goal or those goals achievable?
Thanks, Nick. Ron, do you have any thoughts you'd like to share in terms of what works and what doesn't? How do you actually really truly build the culture of diversity and inclusion?
I do have some thoughts. Thanks, Suneel. I think diversity only takes place if there is commitment at the top of the organization, whether it's the top of the law firm, top of the corporation, or whatever. My 20 years of leading organizations tells me without having commitment at the top, it ain't going to happen. And once you have commitment at the top, I think the organization needs to, touching on something Nick said, have hold people accountable for things that help embrace, attract, and develop the diverse talent within your organization. Those things could be ensuring that senior lawyers are giving junior lawyers choice assignments, that they're giving them equitably, that they are giving them feedback on their performance regularly, that they are getting exposure to clients regularly as appropriate. And to the extent there are warning signs, and I think Macey will touch on this, like write-offs of associates' time, have that early warning sign signal, what is it about this associate's time that was not worthy of charge to the client, and try to dig and see whether or not there is some developmental issues, developmental opportunities that could be embraced. I think if you start at the top and you put in place that kind of thoughtful, intentional accountability, you have a very good chance of winning.
Thanks. Macey, you've studied these sorts of subjects, and I know you've thought about it a lot. Are there differences in structures that you think lend itself better to the sorts of things that Ron just mentioned in terms of getting the commitment at the top and holding people accountable? Are there structural things in terms of the way firms are managed that either stand as barriers or things that actually really work in terms of advancing the cause?
Thank you. So this is kind of a combination of addressing what Nick and Ron had to say. You definitely need commitment at the top. Where most firms fall flat is there's little or no accountability. There's no carrot, there's no stick. And we easily let people off for not doing what they're supposed to do. I mean, the playbook is there in terms of what can be done, the kinds of programs that can be done. But a lot of this comes back to no matter what program you have, it comes to the question, and I hear this over and over again, I just don't want to hire somebody I don't think is qualified. And so we need to start dealing with the question of what's qualified. Is it qualified today? Is it qualified in the future? Is it qualified without any help from your firm in terms of training and mentoring and teaching? What do you mean by who's qualified and who's not qualified? Here, there are pipeline issues. And when I looked at the number of African Americans who graduated from law school from 2015 to 2019, there were over 16,000 graduates. Almost 3,000 graduated from top 25 law schools that could work in any of our firms. But for some reason, there's a barrier there where you could take the same person sitting in a classroom at Harvard or Boston College and send two of them to the firm, and they have two different experiences. And there's no accountability if the experience of a minority associate is a negative experience. So the example is, we like to think that the law firm model is a meritocracy. So I always joke, okay, that means you have to swim across the pond or the lake, and if you make it to the other side, then you can become a partner. Well, white guys swim with a life vest. Women, they don't give them anything. But minorities, they put rocks in your pockets. You know, it's like the studies that have been done over and over again. Black folks think they have to make white people feel comfortable in order to get assignments, in order to be mentored, in order to be trained. And there is zero accountability to this. I think people have to really stop and think about what that means. Like, if you're inviting somebody into your home and then you don't talk to them, you don't feed them, you don't nurture them, and then you wonder why they're not successful, you really got to stop and take a look at yourself. So I'll tell you what's not a best practice that should be, and that is holding partners accountable for being welcoming of people they invite into their homes. We let them off the hook. Clients let them off the hook. But we all need to understand that every year, every partner in every major law firm, power goes away if that client stops sending them business. And so there's a power piece to this. There's another piece to this, and then I'll stop. But I firmly believe that there are talented minority lawyers, if given the chance, can succeed in the law firm. It may mean that you have to qualify them along the way, meaning if they need, more substantive knowledge in a particular area of IP practice, or if they're going to be in a subspecialty, they need more business knowledge and more training. There's a big difference between being provided the opportunity to learn as opposed to the inability to learn. And we tend to put people of color in the bucket that we look at them right away and we say they're incapable of learning and doing the things that we do. So therefore we don't bother to train them. So there needs to be a discipline in law firms about how they approach this. You know, you can make all the arguments. What if it was your kid or your grandkid or your son-in-law? Would you treat somebody the way you treat your minority associates? And so I think that's, you know, the core. We could give you lots of examples of things to do and ways to be transparent. But if you're not giving people an equal opportunity when they walk in the firm, they're just never going to be successful. And we'll be having the same discussion, you know, 25 years from now. So I'll stop there.
If I could build
Suneel,
on what Macey
can I?
was saying, if I could build on what Macey was saying.
Yep. Go ahead, Ron. I'll go after you.
Okay, I'm sorry, Marla. And this is why accountability becomes so important. If you think about the typical law firm, you have a bunch of bodies orbiting the firm, with different orbits, sort of randomly, and maybe there's some structure where they are assigned together. Well, if you let the randomness happen, in a typical law firm, the person who's different, the Black person, the person with a different sexual orientation, the women, tend not to get the training and development if it's left to randomness. If you hold people accountable and you say, hey, partner, you had a guy work on an asset purchase agreement, or you had a guy work on a patent application, and you hold the partner accountable for coaching that person into how to draft, how to negotiate, how to engage with the client, whether the person is a woman, a Black person, or a white person. If you have that accountability, you've got a better than even chance of that person progressing and developing, no matter what they look like, if they are inclined to develop and progress.
So one thing, and Ron basically saying that we've got to be deliberate, because this just letting the status quo go is not going to do it. And I think, in Macey's comments about making people feel at home, right? So I just share a quick story, because part of what we're talking about here is not forcing people of color to assimilate into a traditional all-white environment. So I had a conversation, it's probably 10 years ago now. I was having a discussion about diversity in law firm environment. And I was saying that, one of the reasons that I have survived in this environment is because I grew up in an almost all-white environment. I went to an elementary school through 8th grade where I was the only Black person in the entire school. And in high school, there were 2 to 3% Black folks. So I can walk into any environment. I can walk into an all-white room and feel comfortable because I'm used to it. And the person I was having the conversation with, that person's response was, well, we need to find more people like you. And my response to him was, no, you don't. Like, you have missed the entire point, right? The point is not to take a law firm environment, which going back, hundreds of years for some of these white shoe firms, is a white, male, heterosexual, cisgender environment. The point is not to keep that environment and force people from the outside to be comfortable in it. The point is to open up the environment and make it one where everybody feels comfortable. And I think that's just a huge piece to getting this right.
Suneel, I had a question for the panel, if I may. Nick referenced encountering an individual early on in his career who Nick very politely sort of misinformed, or perhaps worse. And Macey talked about rocks in people's pockets and so forth. And one of our formal next questions, if you will, is, do you think there should be training on unconscious bias? The thinking being that you can have the commitment at the top and the structures in place, but on the one-on-one context, is there room to improve? But it also struck me, that's just one of the elephants in the room, flat out conscious bias. And Marla, from your perspective, how you handled that one, and I'm thinking, what can law firms best do also to inform people, if I may use Nick's verb?
So if you want me to address that, Piers, in terms of, unconscious bias,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's important information to have for people to understand that it exists and that it exists in everyone, and it can kind of make discussions easier overall. But I think at the end of the day, what drives lawyers in law firms is compensation and their position in the firm. And whatever a firm does to incentivize kind of the behavior that it wants, it's usually incentivized by compensation and rank in the firm. And firms that are going to be serious about diversity are firms that are going to take that into account when compensating lawyers and putting them in certain positions. And then I think when lawyers actually engage in the behaviors to make the law firm more diverse and inclusive, even if it's at first because they have to, because their compensation and their position in the firm depends on it, I think that's where the educating happens. If you put a person where they are more likely to work with a person of color because it will benefit them personally, they are going to get something out of that relationship that might make it so that the next time they're working with a person of color, it's not just because their compensation or their position in the firm demands it.
Got it. Nick, would you have any thoughts on conscious or even unconscious bias, either from a sort of candidate perspective or a law firm mentor perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I am a firm believer that training can be helpful, but training alone doesn't get you even close to the finish line. So, I mean, I think of people's sort of knowledge levels in the diversity, equity, inclusion areas is basically falling into three groups. You got the people who are already active. And so training for them, they'll be receptive to it because it may offer them some new tools for them to use in a space they're already, as I said, active in. Then you got sort of a middle group where they're maybe not particularly active, but they're not opposed to doing more, and given tools, they are likely to move more toward being active in the space. The third group is somewhere between indifferent and opposed. And so that group, maybe they will undertake training, but it isn't necessarily going to make them in fact act. And that's where the accountability piece that a number of us have talked about, that's what has to be a critical and necessary part of your diversity, equity, inclusion efforts, training plus accountability. And so I think I'm echoing some of the things others have said. I absolutely and firmly support diversity, inclusion, equity training, but that alone won't get you there.
Thanks,
Yeah, if I could build on that, Piers. In some ways, analytically, I think we have it backwards. I think I have never been in an environment where if I am performing because I have been developed, I have been coached, I have learned how to counsel, I've learned how to draft, I've learned how to synthesize business and legal problems, and all that other stuff that's required to become a complete business lawyer, if not an executive and CEO. If I can do that, people have a consistently remarkable self-interest. They gravitate you because you will make them look better.
Mm-hmm.
You will make them look better in front of the client. You will help them get their bonus. You might help them get their promotion. And when people see that typically when people see that, they gravitate towards you. And getting familiar with folks' family and their culture and stuff kind of happens sort of by osmosis, right? And so I would, again, as I started out by saying, I would kind of flip it and say, if people are performing a lot, not all, but a lot of this sensitivity takes care of itself, right? Out of self-interest.
Thanks, Ron. Macey, any thoughts along those lines?
Yeah, let me just add quickly to it. So what we're really talking about is creating debiasing activities. So the question is not whether bias training works, is whether you can debias people. So a couple quick examples of the way you do that is if the minority associate has a good result, you broadcast that to the entire firm. A lot of times the minorities will have a good result in court or in a deal, and they don't get any credit for it. There's no public acknowledgement of it. And so therefore people walking around thinking, well, they're not very good. Why would I use them? So you have to broadcast successes when they happen. The second piece is that you can do that. I've written about the joint development of minority talent. And the reason I wrote that article is that if you, for example, had a minority associate work with a client on a newsletter, and the client and the in-house lawyer says, this is what I want to do, I guarantee you the partner who has a relationship with that client is going to be involved in the drafting of that newsletter, which means they're going to be forced to work together. What you then do is you have that minority associate do the presentation to the client. And you ask as part of the presentation to the client for the client to provide feedback to the minority associate about how they've done. And so when that in-house lawyer is providing that feedback to that minority associate, that's creating, it's a debiasing activity, but it's also putting that partner on the spot. The client is saying, hey, this person's really good, and I like to see this person developed in the firm. And it leads it to that partner walking back to the firm saying, well, I've always wanted to use Billy on these matters, but the client seems to want to, use Juanita, to use a black name. But we need debiasing activities, and these activities then trigger behavior, which is, oh wow, Juanita's really good on this stuff, and then all of a sudden everybody wants to use Juanita, and then it's like, where can we get another Juanita? But that's a different discussion. But organizations have to find ways to debias folks. If you look at the ABA study on prove it again bias, it's there. It doesn't matter how good a job a person of color does. There's a presumption that they didn't do a very good job, and they got to prove it again. So we got to find triggers, and we got to find opportunities for them to showcase their talents in a way that's difficult for the white partner, so to speak, to kind of dismiss what their accomplishments are.
Now, Suneel, there was a question submitted that I'd like to respond to that I saw in the chat. And it talked about senior lawyers not being inclined to train lawyers. And I don't argue that against that point at all. There are a certain number of senior lawyers who are unwilling, unable, or whatever to train younger lawyers. The narrow point that I would make is that no matter who you are, as you should take charge of your own career and hold the supervising attorney or executive or partner or whatever responsible for giving you feedback. How could I have done this memo better, argued this brief better, written this motion better, negotiated this deal better, all right? What did I do well? What did I not do so well? You can do that. You have that power.
So while we're on that topic of giving feedback, I'd like to open it up to the panelists. If somebody wants to take on the topic of explaining the difference between teaching, mentorship, and sponsorship, what the differences are between those three ideas. And
because
for
if you're not getting feedback, you're not going forward.
And so are there things that any of you have observed in terms of your own practice that are particularly effective or ineffective in terms of giving feedback? One of the things that is a concern on my end is that I think there's been a lot of discussion about moving away from the annual performance review sort of model of giving feedback, and I do think that getting contemporaneous feedback is really important. But as people change their models of how to, and what I guess the question that I'd like to articulate for the panel is, what is the most effective way to get feedback, to junior attorneys in a way that's effective and consistent and constructive?
I think constantly and honestly. And, Suneel, you raised the issue of moving away from annual reviews. I think that from a generational perspective, we need to do it because, this younger generation, they want feedback regularly and they benefit from it. And so to wait 9 months to give someone feedback on a project, I think we are setting ourselves up to not have this generation of lawyers do as well as they otherwise could.
I think you could have a download, for about 20 minutes after every assignment. It doesn't require, a lot of infrastructure. How did this brief? How did this asset purchase agreement? How did this memo? What could I have done better? If you build that discipline into your practice.
I think we've lost Ron again.
Ron, I think we just lost you. We lost your audio.
Let me jump in when Ron comes back. I think what you need to add to this is the reality is law firms have no problems telling a minority associate that they're doing a poor job when they want them to leave. So this whole idea of feedback and transparency is important. If you can tell someone after 2-3 years they're not good enough, why don't you tell them that, or give them that feedback 3 months in, 6 months in, 9 months in, when they have an opportunity to improve. And there's just this whole idea that people of color can't take constructive criticism is a myth. I'll leave it at that, because they can handle it. And to say, we're afraid to be critical, be honest. If it's a writing ability, is it really writing, or are you just saying the person's not smart enough, so therefore the writing's not clear and confusing? And if it's not clear on a particular topic, well, what is that? Is that a substantive issue, or is that a client knowledge issue? I mean, all these things are fixable. I have a hard time believing that the talented people graduating from law school with the proper training and development can't do this. And on the point of teaching, mentoring, and sponsorship, real quick, teaching's more effective because it doesn't call in all those attributes that go with being a mentor. Just teach them what it is that you want them to know, and go from there. And if a mentorship relationship develops, that's fine. But at least teach them what they know so they can be competitive.
But they have to have a sponsor, right? They have to have someone that is in those upper ranks that's going to sit, that's going to have a seat at the table and advocate for that person. I mean, and that's that distinction between a mentor and a sponsor. That's important, where a lot of attorneys of color just do not have sponsors.
I think those are great points. Since we're running short on time here, I want to tee up what I think is an important question that I want to make sure the panelists have a chance to address. And that is the notion of in-house interests and private practice, and what kind of collaboration can be done to make sure that we're all working toward the same goal. And I know, Marla, you had already mentioned that that there's ways to get the minority candidates out in front of the clients so that the in-house counsel can actually select and actively send work to minority candidates. That's one approach that could be successful. Are there other approaches that we should be aware of in those efforts? I'm throwing that one out to the panel at large as to, and maybe we should direct that question to Nick, since you've based on private practice and patent prosecution. And
happy to quickly speak on that. I mean, I think majority of my career I've been in-house. I do have private practice experience as well, and over time, my view is that there can be a really, really synergistic sort of relationship between the clients and the law firms that they retain in terms of individual lawyers and talent within those firms. As the client, you can drive some behaviors that the firm should be willing to do on its own, but it's really not only in their best interest, but it's in the client's best interest. I talked previously about best available talent. And so I think if you're in-house, you really are in a good position to drive that dialogue, ask those questions about what's the firm's view in terms of the makeup of the team that's assigned the matters for your company. You can, if not demand, and in fact you can if you want to go that far, but you can certainly encourage the firm to speak to the makeup of the teams that are assigned to your company's matters. And I think in doing that, you can urge that firm to move forward in this space in the way that they might be either reluctant to or just slower if they were left to their own devices. So I know we're short on time. There's a lot more to say in that space, but I'll stop there.
Do any of the other panelists have any other thoughts to add on that, or any closing thoughts on things we've, well, there's a lot that we've missed. Obviously, there's a lot that we're time limited. And, but any closing thoughts from any of our panelists?
I'm happy to offer just a suggestion. In-house counsel should just be selfish. If in-house counsel looking at the world sees the world differently than law firms, then they ought to just develop diverse talent using their law firms. It's that simple. It creates a great opportunity for the diverse lawyers working in the law firms. But if you really want to develop diverse talent, go to the firms that you rely on day to day and use them to develop diverse talent. And maybe they stay with the firm, or maybe they leave and come to work for you. But they're not going to be developed if the in-house lawyers and in-house corporations don't take a more active role in developing that talent.
Thanks, Macey, for making that point. Any other closing thoughts from any of the other panelists? Otherwise, I'll turn it over to you, Piers.
So Neil, I do have one question. I noticed that there were some questions submitted during the course of the discussion. I don't know that we've gotten to speak directly to all of those. Is there an opportunity for us to maybe send you some thoughts in response, and then you can take it upon yourself to respond to those people who submitted questions? I just don't want anyone who took the time to offer a question to feel that it was ignored.
Absolutely. And so if anybody does have any questions that didn't get answered during the session, feel free to submit those questions to me, and I will make sure that I get those questions to the panelists and gather their thoughts and get those responses back to you. So with that, Piers, I'll turn it over to you to give some closing thoughts.
Thanks very much, Neil. Well, I just want to extend a huge thanks again to our panel. Marla, Ron, Nick, and Macey, I really appreciate your time. I know you're all busy people, and it's a weird time we're living through anyway with the pandemic. So thank you for joining us. We're really excited about the journey we're on, about meaningful change. I appreciate your thoughts today, and I know all the listeners have enjoyed them too, and clearly we've a lot of questions come in. So thank you. We'll get those questions to you. Appreciate your time, and if it's okay with you, panelists, I'm sure our firm will be looking for further guidance and advice down the road. And if it's okay with you, we'd love to stay in touch and really make some change here. So thank you again, everyone, and thank you for joining us today.
Okay. Good luck, everybody.
Thank you.
Stay safe. Stay safe.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank
you so much.
Bye-bye.